So I'm pretty sure all of you have probably seen the huge trend of iceberg videos. You take the concept of the tip of the iceberg and you put it in a more literal sense. We go past the tip of the iceberg, go down to the obscure, the deep, depressing, dark depths of Nickelodeon. Hidden behind that orange foot is some disgusting, deplorable things. I mean, even the foot itself is a little bit disgusting as well, if you think about it. Now, most of us are pretty aware of a lot of Nickelodeon controversies. I mean, we already have Dan Schneider with the whole foot situation, but there are some things you couldn't even possibly imagine when it came to Nickelodeon. I mean, it's a huge media corporation. With huge media corporations comes really dark and disgusting things. Basically, rich people who think they can get away with everything type deal. So what I did is I researched a lot of different icebergs. See, most people kind of just take a Reddit post of an iceberg that someone made and just go down the line and read what they are. But I attempt to gather a bunch from different icebergs that I saw and kind of make my own in a more summarized fashion where I can make sure everything I mention is at least somewhat interesting. And also try to stay away from the very well-known obscure things, if that makes sense. You know, things that are technically obscure, but it's kind of been brought to light a lot more. So I split this up into 5 tiers. Obviously, tier 1 is the tip of the iceberg. And when we get to tier 5, I just want to mention everyone, I saved tier 5 for all of the more trigger warning, depressing, hard to listen to things. So just preemptively, tier 5 is pretty dark and they might completely ruin your childhood, but hey, that's what I'm here for. Come on.
Oh God, someone please help.
Oh my God, are you okay?
Oh God, I haven't eaten anything in weeks. Please, can you spare a bite to eat?
Oh yeah, of course. I'm sure I have like some burger or leftover food around here somewhere.
A burger? A man comes in here starving for weeks, potentially dying soon, and all you have to offer is a measly burger?
What?
Well, you know, I want something more unique, refined, maybe cultural, perhaps.
Well, I mean, I do have this box of Japanese snacks.
Wait a second, are you talking of the amazing Boxu, the Japanese box service that gives you amazing treats and unique things exactly from Japan?
Yeah, but don't you think you need some
And
food?
honestly, you know, that would be an amazing gift to give this time of year to your friends and family. And if you get yourself some Boxu before the end of December, you get your chance to enter a free trip to Japan. Now, how amazing is that? All you have to do is go into the description and click that link and get yourself some Boxu, and boom, you'll enter to your chance to win. Now, isn't that incredible?
Okay, yes, Boxu's amazing, but I'm pretty sure you need food right now.
No, just because I'm starving and on the verge of death doesn't mean I don't have a refined taste, you fool.
So the tip. Just the tip. It's full of your basic Nickelodeon nostalgia things. A piece of Nick that you definitely have seen once or twice in your life and you have fond memories of. You know, the Kids' Choice Awards with the whole slime thing, where it gave kids a chance to feel like their opinion matters. We know it doesn't. No one actually cares. It was rigged anyway, but hey, whatever. We also had the classic Nickelodeon shows. Now, these were one of my favorites back in the day. Sound like an old man when I say back in the day. But these game shows were some of the funnest game shows I've ever seen out of television. Very surprised they kind of just stopped making them, but I guess, you know, it was the 90s. It was a big boom of game shows and then it kind of piddled out after a while. Also, you know, SpongeBob came about, and after SpongeBob came about, they kind of just said, screw everything else. But to list some of these game shows, of course, we have the more popular ones like The Legend of the Hidden Temple, which was my personal favorite when I was younger. Basically, a bunch of kids attempt to find these treasures inside a temple that was protected by Mayan guards and other obstacles and stuff. And of course, there was a gigantic talking stone face, which most people probably had nightmares of. And surprisingly enough, this show had a reboot recently in October on the CW. Now, I have no idea if this show is actually good. I haven't seen it at all, but I thought that was pretty interesting. They actually re-released this show this year. And we also had Guts, which is basically just like the athletic challenge for kids of Ninja Warrior type deal. They had Double Dare with the gigantic nose that snotted everywhere. I didn't really watch that show much because snot and me just don't get along. I don't like snot. I don't know why. To be fair, slime in general always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Then we had the more obscure game shows that weren't as popular. We had Crazy Kids, Brain Surge, Figure It Out, and a bunch of others. You know, 90s once again, huge time for game shows. We also have things like Nick at Night. You know, everybody remembers Nick at Night. It's a show that started around 9 p.m., went until 7 a.m., basically Nickelodeon's version of Adult Swim, but a little bit more sitcom-y and less weird. I mean, don't get me wrong, Adult Swim is freaking amazing. amazing, but some of the stuff is weird, obviously, compared to the sitcoms that we get like Full House from Nickelodeon. But you know, like I said, they had Full House, Cheers, Three's Company, and a bunch of other sitcom type shows. And I think they are still running to this day. I tried to look up some stuff and it seems like it's still going, because when I researched it, young Sheldon is apparently playing on Nick at Night. So that's interesting. And another fun tip of the iceberg we have is Worldwide Day of Play. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this. I remember this. You know, it's that day you come home ready to watch shows and boom, you got 3 hours of no shows and they say, hey, go outside. But for those who don't remember, basically it was Nickelodeon and all of its sisters channels just suspended programming for 3 hours on a specific day. You know, just to promote, hey, get out, work out, body positivity, be more active, blah, blah, blah. But let's be real, most children just ended up changing the channel.
It's Nickelodeon's Worldwide Day of Play. We're getting out and getting active, and you should be too. We'll be back at 3.
And the last thing we have is obviously just classic Nick shows like Doug, Cat Dog, Angry Beavers, which is one of my favorites, Ren and Stimpy, Rocket Power, As Told by Ginger, Rocco's Modern Life, and so many more. Those people watching this video who are around my age would probably consider this to be the golden years of Nickelodeon because they had so many good shows. Now all Nickelodeon has is just SpongeBob, and that's it. Nick has this huge problem where they don't let the potential of a show be fulfilled. They cancel it before they're able to flourish and get to the point where the show is very good. They had this weird anxiety, or I guess fear, that if a show isn't doing insane ratings, that it's never gonna catch back up. That's why so many of these amazing shows were completely canceled very quick. And now, like I said before, all we got is SpongeBob. Okay, let's dig a little deeper. Let's move down to tier 2 of the iceberg. And let's start with Snick. Now this is something I don't remember, but the logo looks familiar. Snick was kind of just like Nick's on Saturday. It says it was meant for older kids, you know, like pre-teens and teenagers around that time. Some of the shows I ran on there were like Rugrats, All That, Kenan and Kel, The Amanda Show, the infamous movie that scared the shit out of me and many children called Crybaby Lane, but Crybaby Lane's something that we'll get to later. But I feel like Snick is definitely something that not many people know about or really remember. I mean, maybe I'm just too young to remember it. You know, it aired like early 90s and it only played for a couple of hours. And we also had Oh Yeah Cartoons. Now this is actually where all of your favorite cartoons came from. Oh Yeah Cartoons, basically an animated show where they showcase a bunch of different animated shorts and kind of gauge which one people like the most and end up turning those shorts into a full-fledged show. Which honestly is such a smart and cool idea. Like, what happened to Nick, dude? But some of the shows that came out of Oh Yeah Cartoons was actually Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Chalk Zone, Cow and Chicken, Fairly Odd Parents, and a lot more. Now, I think some of these actually ended up moving over to Cartoon Network, but I mean, they were picked up from Oh Yeah Cartoon. But yeah, it was basically like a testing grounds for a bunch of animated shorts and animated shows that people wanted to get funded and eventually did get funded by either Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or someone else. And next, of course, we have the Nick Resort Hotel. Oh boy, do you remember seeing that commercial? I'm like, Mom, I want to go. And then you realize, oh, we're broke. We don't have any money to go anywhere. But yeah, if you don't remember, there was a commercial that came on all the time for Nick Resort and Nick Hotel in Orlando, Florida. And I don't know if it was just me, but I definitely wanted to go. Obviously I couldn't because I didn't have the money back then, but boy did I want to go. But how it all started is Holiday Inn was bought up by Nickelodeon and was like transferred into a Nick Resort Hotel. Basically it was trying to leech off the success of Disney and, you know, they didn't really get much results out of it. It didn't last long. The unfortunate location of this was across from Disneyland, and Orlando Studios, which is kind of what they were trying to boost here, was way down the road. And the big problem here is the cost of renting a room at the Nick Resort Hotel was way too freaking expensive for people to just go there and end up going to Disney World anyway. So a lot of times people didn't really end up going because to get your money's worth, you kind of had to stay around hotel grounds, because if you left, it's just like, what's the point of spending that extra money when I could just get a hotel like down the road that's way cheaper? Because let's be real, most people who go to Orlando, Florida aren't going for a resort hotel water park experience. They're probably going for Disney Disney World, or they're going for Universal Studios. Also, another thing, it wasn't really close to the ocean. It had no ocean view. It was really like claustrophobic. It was kind of surrounded by a bunch of buildings, not really a nice place. And on top of that, it wasn't really well kept. They really didn't do a good job at making the rooms look nice or keeping the building up to date. It kind of started falling apart. Also, the costumes that the Nickelodeon people wore were just kind of botched and not that well done, so it kind of looked scary as shit. So obviously the resort kind of just faded into irrelevancy and never to be talked about again. Until now. All right, let's move on to a show that never aired. Well, I mean, kind of did, but kind of didn't. It was called Crash Nebula. Now, this one is more interesting than anything. It was actually a show that was a spin-off of The Fairly Odd Parents. And we all know Butch Hartman is kind of a weirdo, but at the same time, he did make Danny Phantom and The Fairly Odd Parents. But he kind of was pushing his luck with the shows that he was making and tried to push out another show called Crash Nebula. So how the story goes is there was this episode on Fairly Odd Parents that was centered around a superhero named Crash Nebula. And I actually remember this episode very vividly when I was younger because it played a lot. I don't know if it was like a certain promotion period, but it played a lot and I saw it a lot. But anyway, Tim explains the backstory behind the character Cosmo and Wanda. And even at the end of the episode, it has Cosmo literally saying, "Wow, that was cool. I wish I could have seen that." And even Wanda saying, "I'm sure they will run it again." Really leaving a cliffhanger and pushing that, hey, this is a show, it's gonna come out soon. So Butch Hartman literally made a whole episode of The Fairly Odd Parents dedicated to promoting this show that was canceled before it even aired. The show is supposed to be the backstory of Crash Nebula as a teenager. And the show just wasn't good. It kind of just felt like a parody off of The Fairly Odd Parents or Danny Phantom. It felt really lazy. And honestly, I feel like Butch was kind of overreaching when it came to shows for Nick. I mean, hell, Nickelodeon cancels the best shows on their platform for basically nothing. So I'm sure it just didn't fit the bill for what Nick wanted and ended up just falling into irrelevancy. Next, we have Cartoon Lost and Found with Adam West, another show that was kind of canceled before it was ever released. Now, since we're going to be talking about things like lost media or other things that are kind of hidden and forgotten about, this is kind of what this show was based around. Nickelodeon made a show about finding lost animation. Cartoon Lost and Found was a late-night television special that was dedicated to finding the old cartoons that have been lost and forgotten and bringing them to the forefront with the charismatic Adam West as the host. There's actually a full pilot episode on YouTube that you could find right now and watch it if you wanted to. And honestly, it looks like a very interesting idea for a show. I know they were trying to appeal to like older audiences, you know, that want to look back at nostalgic cartoons that they used to watch when they were younger. But even if you're not an old person, I feel like the show would have been pretty interesting. But unfortunately, it was never picked up by any of the studios and it was, again, left to fade into irrelevancy. All right, let's get a little bit deeper. Remember, the deeper we go, the more obscure, darker it gets. Let's move on to tier 3. Helga's mom is an alcoholic. That's a good start. Okay, now a lot of us grew up on Hey Arnold. Let's be real. The show was great. I mean, that and obviously Rocket Power are probably one of my favorite shows back then, and maybe Rocco's Modern Life. There's a lot of them. But something I didn't really pay attention to when it came to Hey Arnold is how depressing Helga's life actually is. I mean, she was pretty much the black sheep of the family. She was a complete outcast when it came to her family, honestly. I mean, they literally have a family picture, but with Helga off by herself, while Olga and her parents are just all together as a family. After looking at it like an adult, Helga's behavior makes a lot of sense. I don't think she's a bad person at all. She just puts walls between her and other people because of the neglect she gets back at her home. But throughout the show, we always see Helga's mom lethargic. She's struggling to stay awake or even struggling to talk, and she's always drinking a smoothie. And obviously as a child, I didn't really realize what was going on, but yes, Helga's mom suffers from depression and is an alcoholic. While at the same time, Helga's father is a workaholic who kind of seems like a very, very aggressive father. Not only that, but Olga, who is her sister, gets all of the attention and Helga just gets treated like utter garbage.
Genius!
Daddy, who's gonna take me to play school?
Huh? Oh, yeah, sure. Come on, play us another one, Olga.
Helga's father constantly compares her to Olga and sometimes even calls Helga Olga. I never actually realized how deep and depressing this got, but this is something a lot of people can relate to with negligent parents. It just begs the question, what was going on behind the times that we're not seeing Helga on screen at home? Like, her life's pretty bad. Which leads me to my next topic, the Patakis. Yes, there was going to be a spin-off show of Hey Arnold called The Patakis. Craig Bartlett wrote a script in 2000 for a spin-off show with Helga as the main focus of the show, but it was canceled because it was too dark. The only information we've ever gotten on the show was with the interview of Craig Bartlett. Apparently all the cast members in Hey Arnold would have been there in The Patakis except Arnold. Kind of like a Rugrats all grown up situation. But as for Arnold, he ended up moving away. And this is where it gets really sad. Helga, who is 15 in the show, is still crazy obsessed with Arnold. Apparently in the show, it's implied that they dated for a while, went through tough times, ended up breaking it off. But Helga obviously still loves him. Helga writes a letter to Arnold every night, takes it to the post office, decides not to send it, brings it back home, and puts it in an organized binder, similar to that of, you could compare it to the shrine that she made of Arnold in the original show. But she's an awkward teen who still deals with the same situation of her parents. She still has the whole pigtails and unibrow situation, and she hides under her baseball cap everywhere she goes. And as for Olga, she actually went to college like her parents wanted her to, but then she decided she wanted to pursue theater, but her parents obviously were not happy about that. They get into altercations with Olga. Olga ends up losing favor with her parents, and Helga is still going on in her life very lonely. Honestly, not a terrible premise for a show. I would be kind of interested in watching it. And apparently there are some petitions out there that were made on the internet of people begging any streaming company like Netflix or Hulu or someone to pick up this show and make it into a full thing, which honestly would be pretty cool. I'm always down for more Hey Arnold lore. There's even fan animations on YouTube of the Patakis show that people kind of took an interpretation of what they heard on the internet from that Craig Bartlett interview and put it into something. Kurt Cobain's Ren and Stimpy song. Now this one is more funny than depressing or dark, but it's definitely obscure. It's not even confirmed that this is actually true because there's been no recordings ever found. And I did try to make this full list with everything completely confirmed, so you know you don't have those like, oh, maybe or maybe not situations. But this one is just very interesting, and we even have one of the producers of Ren and Stimpy literally saying that it was Kurt Cobain. So apparently how the story goes is Kurt Cobain goes up to the animation studio responsible for making Ren and Stimpy, says, hey, I want to make a song for this show, which is just a hilarious image to think of Kurt Cobain just bursting through the doors of an animation studio being like, hey, I'm making a song, you're all gonna deal with it. And supposedly the executives actually hated the song that Kurt Cobain made, and John Kay, who is someone we're gonna get to later, did not like Kurt Cobain's arrogance. So they ended up throwing him out, trashing the track, and never been heard of again. And I like to think that Kurt Cobain actually just trolled them, because I feel like that's kind of in his character to do. He goes in there, makes a crappy ass song, they all get pissed off because he's egotistical, and then kick him out. Either way, it would be hilarious. And there is no raw evidence or concrete evidence of the situation except a recording that is kind of just speculation, I guess. Stimpy's voice actor, Billy West, was the one who mentioned it on the Nerdist podcast.
One day the scraggly kid comes in and said he wanted to write a song for Ren and Stimpy, and they said, yeah, that's great, and they threw it in the wastebasket, and it was Kurt Cobain.
Oh, shit!
That's an awesome story!
Yeah. And last on tier 3, we have Bloody Grr. Now this one is both interesting and potentially creepy if you ended up seeing it on your screen. By the name alone, you would assume it's some sort of like creepy pasta made on the internet to freak out little children, but it's not. It's kind of just animators kind of trolling Nickelodeon and seeing what they could get away with. So apparently this specific drawing of Grr was created by Chris Graham, and apparently the animation crew all decided that it wouldn't fit within the show, at least Nick wouldn't let it pass. So instead they decided, hey, let's just hide it throughout a bunch of episodes throughout the season. And it kind of turned into a cool Easter egg that honestly, again, would be quite unnerving to find. But it was inserted into single frames throughout the last 14 episodes of Invader Zim. You could even see them now. You could obviously just look it up on Google and see what they are. But yeah, they're still there, and it's a pretty interesting Easter egg to have. And obviously, if I saw that as a child, I would think there's some like crazy conspiracy, dark murder behind it. But obviously, in reality, it's just animators fucking with Nick. Okay, a little bit deeper. Just a little bit deeper. Tier 4. This is where shit starts getting pretty weird. So let's start tier 4 with Crybaby Lane. It's actually a movie that I mentioned earlier. It was actually a horror movie that aired on SNCC, and it was a very, very adult horror movie that was definitely not meant for children. For the longest time, this was actually considered lost media because when it aired on October of 2000, many parents were very angry with Nick, and Nick ended up having to pull it pretty quick. It was so bad that Nick had to completely shut everything down, delete all information of this movie, and never speak of it again. And anytime someone asked Nick about it, they completely denied it. Nick actually covered it up so well that people started speculating it was just another creepypasta that people made up to freak people out. I mean, no one in their right mind would believe that Nick would play a movie that was insanely scary for children. But eventually someone ended up finding the movie. I don't know if they had the movie or maybe they recorded it or something like that, but it's actually completely fully uploaded on YouTube. You could actually watch it now. And this is one of those things where I might take time to make an entire video on just that movie because it is very interesting how dark it is. Super Sponge lewd images. Yeah. Okay. Now, when we think of SpongeBob, we think of this little innocent sponge, you know, happy wholesomeness sponge. Well, that's not the case when it came to the Super Sponge video game. Super Sponge was a video game made by THQ on the PS1. And, you know, it was just your basic average SpongeBob game. You got some platforming, you got collecting spatulas, you got to get a present for Patrick, that whole dealio. I didn't play the game. I just kind of looked up a summary. But some really creepy, weird things lay dormant in the game files of Super Sponge. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure a lot of people would find this more funny than it is creepy, but I mean, if you really put this into context, this is the game that was made for children. And then in the game files, you have an image of SpongeBob pegging Patrick, Patrick banging Sandy, and SpongeBob in full bondage. You know, I feel like this goes a little bit beyond funny sex joke territory. I mean, there's a grown adults putting these into the files of a game that is meant for kids. And ironically, this game was made by a company called Climax Group. And also, Climax is responsible for making Silent Hill. All right, Cosmo and Wanda are antidepressants. Now, this is nothing but a theory, but it's a very interesting and a pretty dark one. So there's this very interesting theory out there that Cosmo and Wanda are just personifications of antidepressants. Cosmo is Zoloft and Wanda is Prozac. And the more you dig into this theory, the more interesting it gets. The whole idea is that Timmy's life, it's kind of awful. I mean, his parents are kind of negligent, his teacher's constantly out to get him, and also right whenever Vicky shows up at his house to become his babysitter, that's when he gets his fairy godparents. And also how the rules work is that fairies are only there until kids don't need them anymore, which is basically kind of whenever they mentally become better or don't need to rely on antidepressants anymore. That's why you see a few other children with fairies as well, which makes it even more depressing that Timmy is the one exception that he stays with his fairies for a very, very long time, implying that Timmy needs antidepressants and is still depressed into his late 20s. And also there is a theory that Crocker, you know, the teacher who is after him to get his fairies, is just someone who is suffering from withdrawals from antidepressants. There's also another theory that makes a little bit more sense, that Mr. Crocker's actually just Timmy's therapist, and he's trying to get Timmy to not rely so much on his antidepressants because he's trying to take away his antidepressants in a way. There's a lot of information out there you could look up about this theory, and the more you learn about it, the more the lines kind of connect. But again, it is just a theory. Banned episodes. Now, this is kind of an open-ended one. This is something you guys could go look for yourselves if you wanted to, because there is a slew of banned episodes when it comes to Nickelodeon, but I'm going to kind of go over the more risque ones. One of the more known banned episodes is Rocco's Modern Life, which is one of my favorite shows. And the episode is called Leapfrog, an episode that was just so loaded with sexual things. So Bev Bighead, the wife of Mr. Bighead, gets very lonely. So she ends up literally abusing Rocco's kindness and pushes herself onto him. There's one point where she basically drugs him. There's one point she shows him her entire naked body. And also she even puts Rocco's naked body into her mouth. Oh yeah, and to make matters worse, whenever her husband comes over and she kisses Rocco in front of her husband, instead of the husband getting angry at the situation, he just calls her ugly.
You saw my wife in her bathrobe? Isn't it awful?
Yeah, if you watch the episode now, it is pretty hard to watch. There's some gruesome parts, a lot of weird, like sexually forcing parts that makes you just feel very uncomfortable. I could definitely see why this one was banned. There is also this lesser known one on a show that was ironically called You Can't Do That on Television. This show was kind of just like a skit show, and there was one skit where they covered adoption and made a joke about a senator adopting a kid for child labor. I mean, this show was aired in the 80s, but making jokes about adopting kids to use as basically slave labor for you is a bit risky. And a lot of people who were adopted or were trying to get adopted were very, very offended by this episode. And the people on the episode were basically just like, oh, we kind of just were ignorant to adoption and how it worked or how sensitive it was. And obviously the episode got shut down pretty quick. And then we also have the Ren and Stimpy band episode. I feel like this one's a little bit more known too. In this episode, Ren and Stimpy gets a very abusive owner, and on the specific scene, Ren kind of beats the shit out of the owner with an oar, and it's pretty graphic for a kid's show. Not only that, but there was a lot of references to tobacco and alcohol, and John K believes this is one of the reasons why him and his team got fired, but we are about to find out in Tier 5 why he got fired. And one more thing before we get to Tier 5, the Angry Beavers lost final episode. The Angry Beavers, again, I keep mentioning this, definitely one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. They actually had a final episode because Nickelodeon was canceling them, and the final episode never got aired because Nickelodeon was basically mad at them for becoming too meta. Basically, the show was surrounded in fourth wall breaks. Even both characters talked to each other as if they were voice actors, and they made a bunch of jokes on Nick's expense. They kind of laughed at Nick, told him how unfair it was they're getting canceled, and talked about cancellations and, you know, just making fun of big media corporations and saying how unfair it is. There's actually a full audio clip of this episode on YouTube that you could possibly find if you search for it. They never made any panels for it or animation for it, but the voice actors did record their lines for this, so you could definitely find it on YouTube. A very interesting listen, I will admit. I kind of wish they made the episode, I'll be honest. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are moving on to Tier 5, and like I mentioned, I saved all of the triggering, depressing, and messed up things for this one. So obviously, if you have some sensitivities to stuff like that, please be fair warned before we go. So let's start with the one that kind of ruined Rugrats for me for good. The Rugrats Storyboard Jam. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of Storyboard Jams. Basically, it's the equivalent of a fan fiction, but it's actually the animators who make the show who do it. Or I shouldn't say animators, I should just say everyone. Producers, everyone alike. So how it starts is one person writes a panel, he passes it, next person writes a panel, and then it keeps going around the studio, basically until they have a full story. And everything I looked up about this, people considered this blowing off steam. Because if you are a producer of a children's show, you have a lot of restrictions with what you can and can't do. So I guess people do like really adult things on these panels in order to joke around, blow off steam, blah, 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 whatever. But this one was a little bit overboard, I will admit. There's a storyboard panel that was released by Steve Russell depicting some of our favorite characters doing very, very awful things. So the story starts out with Angelica yelling at Tommy to get her a drink. So Tommy gets her a drink, but he fills it up with Drano and dog food in order to poison Angelica and kill her. Oh boy, that's a good start, and it only gets worse. Then Dee Dee yells at Tommy, and then Stu proceeds to grab Dee Dee's face, throw her to the ground, and proceed to call her a stupid bitch. So we got potential poisoning and domestic violence right off the bat. And then he tells Tommy to give tribute to the alpha male. And then he threatens Tommy that he will kick his ass, and then Tommy starts convulsing on the floor. I don't understand. And this is where it starts getting really bad. So we see Angelica start thirsting over Stu, saying that he is so forceful and that she loves him. Then Stu says, "That's right, my little C word. One day you will be daddy's little girl." Oh boy. So that's the only visual panel we have. And boy golly, I am so glad that's the only one we have, because this next one is rough. This next one was actually quoted by Steve Russell himself, who partook in the storyboard jam. So the next scene was a close-up of Stu's crotch. Then it shows his well-rounded balls with a tiny cock dangling from above. I'm just reading what it says, okay? That ain't me. That's all. I'm just reading it. And later, Angelica was stroking Stu's testicles, followed by a bunch of incest sex scenes. Oh boy. Aren't you guys glad there isn't a second panel? But eventually this was confiscated by how obscene it got. But it just begs the question, what stuff hasn't been found? These storyboard jams probably happen all the time. What deplorable stuff is actually out there that we don't know about? All right, so let's move on. It doesn't get any better. I'm just warning you. So let's start with John K. and the Creep Club. So there's this notorious Nickelodeon club that people collectively made on the internet that was deemed the Creep Club, full of people that were called out for child porn, pedophilia, and other deplorable things. So let's go down the list of what we have and then are going to officially add John K to this list because his crimes are some of the worst ones on here. Ezel Channel or Chanel, I'm not sure, a man who was hired at Nickelodeon while he was a registered sex offender. He ended up befriending a 14-year-old boy, took him to Six Flags, and let him visit the studio he worked at. Apparently, in court, the boy testified that one day he took the kid to the studio and tried to get the kid to watch porn with him, and then proceeded to do terrible things to the 14-year-old boy. I don't want to say it, but I'm pretty sure you all know what happened. He was found guilty of a misdemeanor battery and served a measly 6 months in prison. 6 months. Think about that. Huh? Isn't that just great? Next, we have Brian Peck, a man who was convicted of 2 counts of sexually abusing a child star and served 16 months in prison. And then he was charged with 8 counts of sexual abuse with controlled substances. And the worst part about this is the fact that he was only banned from direct working with children. So that means he is allowed to work on shows with underage children as long as he's not working directly with them. I don't understand this world, man. I don't get it. Next, we have John M. Handy, a man who in his own personal journal referred to himself as a pedophile full-blown. Just cuffed the guy. Like, I don't understand. He took over 1,000 photos of girls at an elementary school that was across where he lived. He literally used a telescope camera, spied on elementary school girls from across the street taking pictures. But not only that, at his church, he worked with 6-year-old girls. All of that while he was the production assistant at Nickelodeon, which obviously gave him even more opportunity to be around children more often. The man finally got caught when he exploited 2 girls who desperately wanted a career on Nickelodeon, and he kind of sexually exploited them for that, and they were underage. He was only sentenced to 6 years in prison, and the only reason why his case is so important is the fact that it reached the media's ear, and this is when Nick's finally like, okay, let's put our foot down a little bit. You know, the media's starting to sniff around, you know, thinking that we got pedophiles working. Let's just put our foot down a little bit. And the most recent case was actually a man named Marin Weiss, who was arrested and charged with 8 felonies from alleged abuse of a boy. And right now he's being held at an $800,000 bail. There's also Jason James Murphy, who actually changed his name after he was convicted of child molestation and abduction 15 years prior. And all that time, he's working at Nickelodeon, just chilling out with child actors under a different name. Oh boy, Nick is just full of these guys. So let's move on to the guy of the hour, John K, the man who I've mentioned a few times throughout this video. He's actually the man behind Ren and Stimpy. There's a lot of detailed videos on the internet about this man if you want to know the whole story, because a lot of this stuff is coming out somewhat recently. But the summary of his whole situation is that he hired a girl intern who was a 13-year-old aspiring to be an animator who looked up to John. And throughout her time working with him, he groomed her, sexually abused her, all that kinds of stuff. Kind of treated her like a pet in a way. And when she finally turned 17, that's when they started dating, and she even moved in with him. Not only that, but John K ended up taking pictures of him having sex with his underage girlfriend and showing it to people around his animation studio. And it wasn't just her. There were many underage girls that John sexually abused and manipulated. The rabbit hole just goes really deep with this guy. And not only that, he apparently had a very big fascination with drawing child porn and showing everyone. There's actually an interview with him on Howard Stern where he shows a character who he considered a hot chick with big cans. And then he ended it with a quote that says, "She's underage too," and then starts laughing.
One of them's a hot chick with big cans and nice legs. Who drew that? You?
She's underage too.
Yeah, very nice.
The part where he says she's underage too is almost like a brag to him. He's literally filled with an echo chamber of people basically saying that it's fine to do this, John K. You're allowed to do this. We're Nickelodeon Studios. We're millionaires. He's literally bragging about finding an underage girl attractive. And when John K apologized, his way of saving his own ass is blaming all of the things he's done on his bipolar disorder. Not sure, but I don't think bipolar has anything to do with being interested in children. And the next one we don't have to mention too much, Dan Schneider. We gotta mention him. I don't even consider him to be on the last tier of this list, but there are so many things about him. And the biggest, strangest thing when it comes to Dan Schneider is the fact that everyone stays silent when it comes to him. I mean, most people know about the foot thing. If you look through the catalog of Nickelodeon shows and all of the feet scenes that Dan Schneider has his paws on, and also the foot of Nickelodeon can be pretty sussy as well. But it's the fact that Nickelodeon fired him after people started accusing him of all these things and started connecting the dots on the whole gross stuff he's doing with the shows. And I think the reason Dan is definitely one of the more known and the worst out of the bunch is the fact that he put these disgusting, weird fantasies out on the big screen for everyone to see. Anytime someone watches a show that has a foot in it on Nickelodeon, they're gonna get uncomfortable. But the really weird part about this is when he was fired in 2018 from Nickelodeon, Nick made no statement on it. Every time you ask Nickelodeon about it, they keep their mouth shut. So no one knows what's going on with Dan Schneider and what the skeletons are in his closet. And last, but definitely not least, we have a very dark case, the Invader Zim inspired murderer. So Scott was a kid that was convicted of murdering his neighbor in a very, very graphic manner. Now, a lot of people obviously are probably going to write this off as blaming media for people murdering people. You know, the whole joke of, oh, games cause you to kill people, movies, violence cause you to kill people, that whole thing. But what Scott apparently did is he broke into her house, bludgeoned her, and eviscerated her, apparently pulling out her organs and other pieces of her body as well. And the reason that this is somehow connected to the Dark Harvest episode of Invader Zim, that episode obviously is about Invader Zim stealing an organ from each student in the school in order to be more human. I've talked about it on my channel. You guys have probably seen it before. But the reason it was brought up in court is the fact that Scott's girlfriend testified that he was curious about how the human body would function without an organ. And even when being shown the images of what he'd done to his neighbor, he was more interested in his work and what was going on with her body rather than caring that someone died. So let's be honest, no one really knows if he was inspired directly by the Dark Harvest episode of Invader Zim, but the fact that there is any connection whatsoever, and it was even brought up as a point in court about it, it's scary to think about, you know? So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, my own custom Iceberg video. I'm sorry that a lot of this probably ruined your enjoyment of Nickelodeon or Nickelodeon shows. And if you guys have anything that I may have missed or that's very obscure that I could talk about later, please let me know, because I realize I missed a lot of things. There are so many different lists out there. I went through as much as I could and just picked out the ones that I found interesting. I mean, obviously this is an Iceberg video, but at the same time, there's still a lot of things out there that we have no clue about. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you like this video, please subscribe. If you like this video, please like the video, because that makes sense. If you like it, then you should like the video. Please comment, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch. Bye.